Hey, good day, everyone. It's V coming to you live from Australia. Matt, somewhere in Canada. I was just talking about my 15-minute city where I've been commuting. I've been receiving some extra credits on my carbon credits. I was able to procure some more crickets, and I have been given the permission to travel 1 more kilometer from my designated city. It's great.
Yeah. This is great, and we're all equally allowed to get extra usage time as a gift of gratitude by the state to
By Supreme Leader Klaus.
Time. Yeah, Supreme Leader Pass. So you've got an extra powerful magic carpet as well, where you can travel to other planets as well. So even though you're physically only able to move maybe 16 kilometers from your house, you can actually go to other planets, Jupiter, Mars, and beyond digitally on your magic carpet. So what more freedom could you wish for?
You can't ask for any more freedom than that, Matt. I mean, being Australian, I'm able to get on my crocodile magic carpet and fly to various worlds like Mars and Jupiter. And I was able to go there and be like, a whole new world.
Beautiful.
A whole new world is where I'd see. Virtual reality will take me there. I will go far without a car. Carbon credits. I don't need any more. I give them away thanks to central bank issued digital currencies. Can't you see it's a whole new world?
Well, this sort of transitions into like one of the things that I think people are beginning to, I hope, wake up to is the fact that this thing called Twitter is not exactly the platform of freedom that we had somehow. It's weird. A year ago, if you asked any halfway reasonable-minded person who kind of knows a thing or two about where the world is going, what's shaping it, the nefarious conspiracies to reduce the world population, they would have said, yeah, Twitter is an intelligence operation, completely controlled. Get the hell off of it. It's run by the military-industrial complex. Common knowledge. All of a sudden, you got the richest guy in the world somehow buys it, who's a proponent of transhumanism, who's actually advocating, just like Klaus Schwab, microchipping our brains, who's the biggest military contractor with the military-industrial complex, with Starlink satellites being used in a proxy war in Ukraine, in the overthrow of the Iranian government, and many other problems of the world. This guy is advertising the 3D printing of mRNA vaccine technology of subsidiaries of his Tesla companies, and his Tesla cars are already proven to be integrated with the whole CBDC digital ID program for shutting off your car, or at least limiting your ability to move, because you can't obviously drive your car more than a couple hundred kilometers before you have to, power it up again. And these things can be shut off automatically from or remotely if you've done something bad, or you've eaten too much meat, or polluted too much this a month beyond your personal allocated carbon credits. All of these things are there, and all of a sudden people think, oh, that's my freedom, is to plunge in and have a podcast or be able to be in my Twitter space 5, 6, 7, 8, 12 hours a day. That's my freedom. And Tucker Carlson all of a sudden showing that he's going to set up a new show on Twitter is just causing all of these people who seemed to be developing a mind over the last couple of years of being slapped down by reality, all of a sudden are just lobotomizing themselves, thinking that, okay, this is the battleground for freedom, is my right to be in Twitter.
Yes.
And now you have this woman, right? This World Economic Forum dossier setter. This woman is a high up executive at the World Economic Forum. I forgot her name, Linda Yaccarino or something. Yaccarino. She's all of a sudden the new Twitter CEO, and again, a few people are saying, well, that's a bit weird, but they're not actually making any appropriate changes in how they relate to their lame ass concept of freedom, being my freedom to just like not be censored on Twitter usually. And even if you had full non-censorship on Twitter, it doesn't matter, because that's not where reality is. There's that's a digital cage, and there's this higher reality where a real fight is happening over the future of humanity. And if you're not part of that on some amplitude, being in reality, organizing in town hall meetings, organizing, running for office, organizing for policies that involve shaping the character of your society towards something that is viable. If you're not doing that, I'm sorry, you might feel like you're free, but the food production systems are still being shut down. The electricity grids in which you rely to access your Twitter is being shut down. No, you're not changing much of anything.
Well, the good thing that our WEF or or WEF or WEF overlords have is very novel in their approach to food production, Matthew. I mean, these Dutch farmers, how dare they? How dare they advocate the release of methane and carbon dioxide with their smelly cows and their disgusting tractors when we could replace all of these farms, which are just, let's be honest, I mean, food is overrated. It's overrated, man. We don't even need that much. Okay? And then having those farms and then in place of those farms, having World Economic Forum food innovation hubs where we innovate food, Matthew. I mean, doesn't that excite you? I mean, there's something ecstatic. I mean, I was blown away when I had my first Impossible burger. I thought it was impossible that something that's derived in a laboratory will taste like like a dish rag. It was impossible, but they did it. And I'm looking forward to this new innovation. All the innovation coming from Klaus's ginormous brain. He's a genius.
Yeah, it's amazing, right? I was just talking to Cynthia. We're working on a series of little videos, little mini documentaries on why there are no limits to growth. So the idea is to just showcase where is all of the false scarcity being created by the absence of the application of viable technologies, not even new technologies that don't exist yet, but just technologies that have existed now that are being sabotaged or not being applied to create abundance. So what are these things? And one of the points she was making to me last night when we were talking was that she spent many hours on the World Economic Forum website. And at this point, I try to generally avoid that cesspool, but it's still useful to look at just some of the conditioning and what they're putting out there as predictive programming. And one thing she pointed out is that it's very difficult to hear any or read anything that is overtly Malthusian or that overtly speaks of the need for population reduction, even though we all know that that is the governing ideology. But they speak in terms of, oh yeah, if we have these new innovative technologies, we can feed the world, several times over. We'll have no more starvation, no more poverty. And, yes, we'll have useless eaters who will be made redundant by automation and these things, but they'll all their needs will be taken care of in our utopian future of applied technology, and they'll have drugs and video games to occupy their attention to keep from being too bored. But in reality, when you look at what they're doing, and this is a good exercise for people who have been a little bit too, I think, conditioned around sense impression, right? We're too susceptible to words, surface words, and we don't often look at, well, what is the agenda, which you have to only see with your mind's eye by looking at where do words that might often sound pretty fall short of the reality, the actions being done by a person or an institution. And here you see, well, in everything that they're committed to doing, from shutting down farmers across Canada, across the Netherlands, imposing food production restrictions, like in Canada, there's an obvious program sponsored by the Canadian government, which is a World Economic Forum government, to reduce food production of all farmers across Canada, deprive them of access of their fertilizer use, because obviously this is bad for the environment and we all care about the environment. But when you destroy the fertilizer access to small and medium industrial farms, well, that's going to also have a corollary to the destruction of your ability to produce food, as we see also in the Netherlands and across Europe with this thing called Fit for 55. The idea that by 2055, there will be a complete carbon neutral and methane neutral mode of behavior in farming. And they're paying farmers to actually get out of farming. In London, I was just reading, or in Britain, I was just reading how they're actually offering farmers 120% of what they would have normally expected to receive in their pensions, because a lot of them are retiring. So they're basically saying, get early retirement, early pension, will pay you 120% of what you were expecting to get had you just waited another few years. And the other thing is they're offering to pay about 50% more for the real estate of the farm value as a whole, in order to just have the state or these I'm not sure which private companies buy up these the various farmlands that are still owned as family farms, and ensure that there is no farming, that these people just leave farming forever. And it's a really clear intention to destroy the food production basis. And I'm not even talking about the food processing facilities, but just the basic food production is being consciously disrupted, destroyed, undermined in order to create a new culture where people think it's normal to eat bugs. Like in Canada, we've got the biggest cricket processing facility in the world.
Oh, you got to be kidding me, man.
Nah, man, it's all sorts of cricket, gummy bear or gummy crickets, cricket flour, cricket, deep fried crickets, like all kinds of varieties of cricket are now going to be accessible to Canadians who are, you know, obviously are repulsed by this, but they're trying to get them young. So they're bringing these things into schools, all the elementary schools across Canada and across, even you see videos in Europe of kids being trained at a young age in the school cafeterias on why, even though your parents are going to think this is weird, it's actually really cool and great, because you shouldn't trust anybody over 30 anyway. And they're just conditioning the kids young to start thinking that this is not disgusting and actually toxic, because there are no safety standards either. Like, I'm not even against intrinsically. I'm not personally against eating bugs intrinsically. I mean, if you know, whatever. But if there's an agenda to do it in such a way that they're, like right now, the bug farms have no safety standards. The bugs are eating their own feces. There's no ability to you know, manage this. There's toxicity in the bug shells anyway. Like there's all sorts of layers.
There are parasites you can't even cook off from the bugs.
Yeah, it's wrong on so many levels. No, I mean,
Klaus, we have to trust Klaus and the people with Klaus, and that's a big thing, man.
Well,
we're the geniuses.
They are the geniuses. I'm not a genius, so yeah, who am I to possibly speak? Yeah, but that's the thing, right? We're just in such a society where people have been conditioned to believe that. I mean, it's the very opposite of what a citizen-based society actually is. A republic can only work if you have citizens, and a citizen is somebody who takes responsibility, participates in the process of democracy, of the process of policy making on a local, state, federal, and even global level. That discussion, the discussion of reality, has to always be present in the minds of citizens, who are constantly looking to be informed and acting upon new information as it comes. And that was the way, you know, there used to be fights. In the 19th century in America, there were fights over whether America was going to adopt protectionism or free trade in bars, you know? Like, that's a healthy type of thing. That's a healthy type of process. Today, we've been told, no, that the world is too complex. That was fine for the primitive age before the Fourth Industrial Revolution, but now things are so complex that regular plebes can't be expected to think about things they're not qualified to think about. That should just be for scientific managerial experts, who are above the pollution of elected democracies, where, you know, things change and fluctuate and people are voted in and voted out. No. Things are so powerful and complex now that we need to have a new breed of managerial elite. And they act like this is a new thing. This is exactly how all oligarchies have ever functioned, was always for thousands of years to have an approved grouping of high priests who know how to manage the levers of population management, perception management, and keep the plebes as decadent, satisfied, and or starving as possible in order to keep them loving their shadows, or at least enslaved by the shadow world that they don't know how to get out of. So it's not a new thing. It's just that it's got a bit more of an appearance of secularity or scientism on the surface, but it's the same old Luciferian cultish doctrines that have always been there for again thousands of years. Even before there was the Christian age, you had proto-Luciferian doctrines managing the cattle class under the cult of Apollo, the cult of Apollo at Delphi, the various Eleusinian mystery schools that were always part of brainwashing operations to both condition through various psychedelic mystical experiences that were being organized by the high priest that would be also managing the banking structures of the ancient world of Greece and ancient Rome. They would basically be organizing international geopolitical wars on the one hand to keep various rival groupings at constant war with each other, but also keeping the population as susceptible and manipulative as possible through heavy doses of orgiastic frenzies as part of, annual or seasonal orgiastic dances and rituals within the Dionysiac celebrations. And this is well documented. The actual organizing of the mystery religions that again utilized various forms of proto LSD type of experiences that used blight, like little mold that would grow on wheat that could then be derived into hallucinogenic experiences, giving people a false sense of spiritualism to break down, deconstruct their identities, both for the elites that would then become the managerial priest class, but then also for the lower level people who would be given doses of this just to keep them in a state of sensualism and an inability to harmonize their sense of conscience and duty with a sense of their desires, their will to want to do that which is necessary for the greater good of themselves and of the world that they're a part of. So that this idea of keeping the science of keeping people at war, at odds with their own hearts and minds, as well as keeping society as a whole at war with their neighbors, with their communities, and making them ultra compliant, and just crafting as well elites that would be given special experiences to be the managerial auxiliaries is not new. This sure, we see newer forms of psilocybines and stuff being now promoted by the Canadian government, by the World Economic Forum, that they're bringing these things online, including in British Columbia, where everything is now legal as a new technique of making you happy and satisfied to be a plebe who can't have any ability to influence your reality in any meaningful way. So like Yuval Harari says, drugs and video games, we have obviously metaverse is not really working out because the technology is more primitive than they're expecting, but they want things like that to work together to keep people willingly out of a citizen identity. Because I guarantee you, they're like, look, if you want to find the people who are the least engaged with taking on moral fights that are more than themselves, the way that we saw with people like, Henry C. Carey, Lincoln, the founding fathers, people like Thomas Paine, who were working on an international level, Benjamin Franklin working on an international level on in the realm of real ontological ideas that impact the potentials of the human species. If you want to find people who are not going to do that, look towards anybody who is just living in that culture of what Yuval Harari wants. And thinking that they're tapping into the divine, inner God in themselves by having these hallucinogenic experiences floating through the metaverses and other realities and dimensions. And I mean, it is that lame, but we're walking into our own slavery, and it's being repackaged by people like Joe Rogan and others who are just stupid on this point as being our freedom to be on Twitter, our freedom to have access to the drugs that we want. These are all the freedoms that we're being told to fight for as we decentralize and all just stop thinking about the big fight for humanity and just think about our own little mini personal realities. That's all that matters.
So you're telling me that we shouldn't be drinking ayahuasca and going on psychedelic trips, and the psychedelic hallucinations that we're seeing it's not reality?
Well, I would say to people who really are in that vibe right now, let's actually defeat the oligarchy and then return back to the conversation when humanity.
Very, very good point. Very good point.
Because
I'm arguing people telling me that the gnomes that they see on these psychedelic trips are actually real and they're trying to steer us into freedom. I'm like, okay, buddy, yeah, you're just hallucinating.
Or you're hallucinating. Yeah, it could be that. Or you could have interdimensional aliens communicating with you, giving you special divine messages from another dimension. That might be happening. Or you might be hallucinating. That's true. You got unresolved shit inside your subconscious that is taking on a more visceral life and experience that you didn't think about. So it's surprising you because we all have shit bubbling in our subconscious that we may not have investigated or explored. And with, that's one interesting thing about the mind is that it's not just the conscious part, it is the subconscious part. And I would say, like there's evidence that under hypnotic trances, people have been found to demonstrate that they can remember everything, right? We are making the choice. I'm choosing to speak to you. I've got a sort of vision that I've chosen to focus on of the camera, of the screen. Certain thoughts I'm choosing to prioritize right now over other thoughts that I'm putting to the wayside. So we're always making choices on varying degrees of amplitude. But, if I were to like leave this room and just document all of or maybe this is a room I'm pretty familiar with, but let's say I were to walk into a room that I'm not familiar with for like, a few minutes and just make a list of how many things I remember after 5 minutes of just trying to just look around, it might be 40, 50 items that I could remember. But they've done studies on people who have been hypnotically tranced, asking them how many things do you remember after a 5-minute experience in a room, and it doesn't stop. There's thousands of things that that are capable of being brought up because they're able to then just tap into the subconscious. So I mean, that's a fascinating thing. And the fact that certain hallucinogenic drugs do bring some of the subconscious material to the surface is an interesting thing, probably worth exploring in some way. But if you're doing it for under the control of an oligarchical set of social engineers, no, I would say that this is probably something that is going to be used against us all. And it is. I mean, the fact is, look at that controller of Kanye West of Ye,
the Canadian special forces guy,
Harvey Pasternak or something. Harvey Pasternak.
Harvey. Yeah.
He's an advisor to a psilocybin manufacturing company that makes as its mandate the rendering of psilocybin tech available to every Canadian anytime they want it. That's part of the mandate. As part of
and this is the whole entire thing. If you notice, right, there's been so much of a push to psilocybin in the mainstream media, in mainstream sources, in mainstream magazine, Reason magazine, Psychology Today, on and on and on and on about psilocybin. Oh, this is good. Mushrooms, healing trauma, blah, blah, blah. And they don't understand that there's a flip side to this. Why do they want you to be hooked on this stuff?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and I was just reading this book here with Cynthia. It was recommended by a friend of ours in Germany called The Immortality Key by this guy, Brian Morescu. And it's called The Secret History of the Religion with No Name. And it's interesting in the sense that it is.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah, you should buy it.
I'm going to buy it. The Immortality Key?
Yeah, it's not super useful, but it's useful in the sense of, it's got an opening by Graham Hancock, and it's really a manual it's a declaration of war against Christianity. And it's laying out in a very readable way. It's eminently readable. It's laying out the template for the creation of new pseudo religious cults that would be animated by the pursuit and embrace of a drug culture to replace the archaic and outdated relics of Judeo-Christian ethic that would then be superseded, ironically, by returning to what they say is the original true doctrine of Christ, which is a psychedelic Christ. Christ was basically it's the old
it's insanity. It's all gobbledygook and psychobabble by people who just want to rebel against something that has helped fashion classical Western civilization.
It's lame. It's that lame, and it really is like the one of the arguments is that how could Christ have recruited as many people as he did so effectively in his followers after he died? How could they have recruited so many people unless they had access to the secret doctrines of the Eleusinian mysteries, which
that's what it was.
People who are geopolitically ignorant, that might seem like an attractive theory. Certainly, I think they do make a solid case that the drug cults that drugs played a very important role in the Eleusinian mysteries, just outside of Greece, as part of the rites of initiation. That seems to be very, very true. And that's what people like Albert Hoffman, the guy who worked with the CIA MK Ultra program, that invented LSD-25, and that worked with leading figures within the military-industrial complex in order to popularize it. People like, there's a whole network. It seems like they were all studying the ancient synthetic cult creation techniques of pre-Christian Roman Greece. They were looking at that, and that's how they did derive their LSD-25. That was then like pushed into the population that created what became the baby boomer hippie generation of, like, I'm going to stop wars and stop corruption by having sex with everything that has a hole in it and having like a big kumbaya while doing drugs with my my unwashed colleagues from university in in fields. I mean, like it was just absurd what was what this generation was put through. But the whole idea was, Jesus was such a hippie, right? Like, look at Jesus Christ Superstar, like Andrew Lloyd Webber. This is the thing that recruited a lot of these the people from that generation who were recruited to Christianity were recruited based on the idea, or many of them were recruited through things like Jesus Christ Superstar that showcases Jesus and his apostles as hippies.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so these people are trying to masquerade like they're intellectuals with academic credentials. And they kind of are in some ways, but only because academia has been taken over by this same anti-humanist priesthood. So it's not really academia in an honest sense of the term of what academia should be, which is a pursuit of truth. And instead, what they're doing is they've got a full-on assault. And one thing that's interesting about this guy, he says, "Oh, I'm Jesuit trained." And what was great about my experience with the Jesuits, Brian Morescu, is that they opened my mind and they set me on my life's mission at Georgetown University, which is a Jesuit-run university where they condition all sorts of...
and there you go. He's admitting to the brainwashing.
Yeah, and he's saying, like, people like me would have been heretical because he's going, visiting the world. And he's like, I went to the Vatican and I went to the catacombs under the Vatican. And in any other year before Pope Francis, I would have been seen as a heretic, not permitted to get access to these catacombs because, it's a fact that there were pagan Roman rites and rituals that were infused when Rome took on the Christian veneer that did create a corruption within Christianity. That's true. But what he then says is, but now the Vatican is so enlightened since the Jesuits have taken more control, and now I had full access to everything: Vatican archives, Vatican catacombs. I had access to full everything I wanted. What a great enlightened world! And I mean, I don't know who would be falling for this, but a lot of people are falling for this sort of thing, not realizing, well, why do the Jesuits exist? And I admit that there are good people who are Jesuits. Yes, I'm not saying that there aren't, but at the same time, the whole Jesuit structure, as far as it being like a paramilitary sacred army associated to keep the Vatican in control, Rome in control, when it was set up in the 1530s under Habsburg dominance of Rome, when the Habsburgs took control of Rome, they created, and I don't say they as far as simply the Habsburg family, but you had the ruling oligarchical structures that were actually the dominant inner families of Rome that then seated themselves and migrated in Europe after Rome fell. And they had a center command structure in Venice with massive branches and penetration into various family structures that they then set up and organized in other parts, including the Habsburg Empire, the Catholic fascist sort of Inquisition Empire, which had its center of command being always in Venice, just like Venice later on established themselves in the Netherlands as well as in Britain with the takeover in 1688. But they had their penetration, their tentacles with their proto-deep state everywhere. Somebody just wrote Fordham is a Jesuit school. Yes, but again, you have to keep in mind, because this person also said, and Trump graduated from Fordham. The thing about Jesuits, as I just said, and I'm not saying everybody who goes to Georgetown or Fordham is that. Not everybody comes out evil, not every Jesuit is evil. Because the thing about the way the Jesuit system is organized is through the Masonic rites of initiation of degrees. This is what the newer Masons after 1701 took on again. The Rosicrucians adopted this technique of giving people a sense of controlled, you're rising through a hierarchy of degrees after being tested by those who are in a higher order level of the priesthood, usually involving certain forms of self-hypnosis. This is the big thing that Ignatius Loyola's meditations are big on, basically conditioning the mind of the subject to become convinced, or to be able to become convinced that white is black, that good is evil. It's right there in his meditations that, you know, if God so wills that white be black, then I must believe that white be black. If my superior deems that I do something which my personal conscience deem is evil, then I must do it because my superior is closer to the will of God than I am, and I let go of my conscience and free will because I am inferior. And so there's all of these self-hypnotic techniques that are part of the experience, such that by the time you get to the higher echelon Jesuits, the ones who are higher up in the chain of command, and here I'm talking about people of the Francis or his coterie, you don't seem to get anything good. Something happens along the way, just like it happens with many Freemasons along the way, where on a lower level, the lower degrees, you've got a lot of really honest and good people who do a lot of good things. But something happens along the way where once you get to those higher 33rd degrees, something different occurs. And this is where you have usually lost yourself along the way in a controlled set of experiences that have brought you to become a managerial member of the system above nation states and above the elected components of government. So all that to say, this is what the Jesuits always have been. This is why they got kicked out of so many countries, from Japan to France to Spain at different times. They were even kicked out. They were banned from Europe by a pope in 1773, Clemens the 14th or something, who ends up dying very quickly thereafterwards. But they're kicked out for 50 years. The Jesuits are not allowed to operate from 1772 all the way until 1815 at the end of the Napoleonic Wars. The Jesuits are not allowed to be in anywhere in Western Europe. They had to go underground if they wanted to remain behind, and otherwise their headquarters that they chose to then center themselves around was St. Petersburg in Russia. And so Russia became, for 50 years, the headquarters of global Jesuit operations until, you know, in Russia, they had their own fight to try to do battle with these things. The nationalists, the people who actually care about Christianity and humanity, who actually, you know, did their fight. There were assassinations in Russia. And at a certain point, the Jesuits were reconstructed back in 1815 to be the policing officers of the Holy Alliance that reasserted the power of the oligarchical class, that basically said, well, look at what happens when we allow democracy and republicanism and ideas that awaken the souls of people's love for liberty and freedom. Look at what happens when we allowed those sorts of ideas to be published in our newspapers and our books. We get Napoleon, a so-called Republican, at least at first, that's how he called himself, who then waged war with the world to try to become, and, you know, Napoleon tried to declare himself emperor of the world. That was his idea, is to reconstruct the Roman Empire with himself as emperor. And so they were like, well, look, if that's what allowing American Republican ideas into Europe gets us, it's best that we just ban those sorts of things forever by reasserting an organizational structure that'll involve the Jesuits of the Holy Roman Alliance, and also that involves the banning of certain ideas from universities, from printing presses. And that's why Americans actually kind of benefited in the 1820s through this mass fascist censorship of an influx of some of the best people of Europe and of Germany, who then started coming in waves into America because they were being destroyed in universities. They couldn't be published. They were artists and scientists who were being annihilated, assassinated. And so to survive, they came to America, which in many ways gave America some of the highest quality minds of the world, thank God, which allowed America to navigate through some of the worst deep state operations that were designed to destroy America from within. And people like John Quincy Adams, Abraham Lincoln in the 1830s were vastly dependent upon these German Republicans in America, as well as in Germany, who stayed behind, who were working with people like Alexander von Humboldt, the great reformer and scientist, who shaped an entire generation or several generations of both artists and American scientists who made pioneering breakthroughs and discoveries that we're not even told about today, or at least that have been obscured, because we've been told that, you know, all great scientists emerged out of the British empiricist tradition. That's the lie that's been told to us. And you know, the reality is very different. The British empiricist tradition was always an operation to undermine and sabotage the evolution of true science from within, by trying to say that no, it wasn't the German scientist Kepler and his harmonic discoveries of proving musicality organizes the behavior of the planetary motions around the sun. It's not that which actually created gravity. It was this guy 80 years after Kepler named Sir Isaac Newton, and who never actually said how he discovered gravity. But when you actually look at those formulas that people like Newton, the great god who had apples fall on his head and he somehow discovered things, they're all of his mathematical formulas for all of his laws of gravity, as well as the calculus itself, were all plagiarized from real discoveries made way before him by people like Christian Huygens, by Gottfried Leibniz, by Blaise Pascal, by Kepler himself, and many others. By Leonardo da Vinci, did amazing work on optics, which was plagiarized by Galileo and then later plagiarized again by Newton and the Newtonian school. Edmund Halley was another grouping within this. The whole Darwinian school that emerged out of the Royal Society of Social Engineers also was a part of this, and they were always tied to Jesuitical operations. The growth of cybernetics, which is at the heart of the whole Great Reset repackaging of eugenics after World War II, which is under the cybernetics doctrine of systems analysis. The idea that all systems, including government, economic, managerial, ecological, planetary, biological systems are all, this is the whole idea of cybernetics. We were told we have to think about all systems as parts that are moving within a whole, right? All of those different categories of systems that I just mentioned are fine, and that's good to think about them that way. It's good to think of everything as a system, but the systems analysis and cybernetics grouping basically said, oh, and by the way, the lens through which we have to evaluate all such systems is through closed binary modeling that is similar to a digital computer. What became digital binary 1-0 computing technology.
Yeah.
Everything is closed, and because they're all closed, that means there's nothing new that could be introduced from the outside or from within, and that all energy within a closed system is ultimately diminishing as the system moves. That every motion requires heat for motion to happen. Motion is caused by heat, and the act of motion creates heat to varying degrees. At any point you have motion, you have some element of heat being created, and that heat is then sucking, because where heat moves in, where heat is created, you have less distribution of heat to go around. So you have a motion towards what's called an irreversible process. Like a reversible process might be a motion of a pendulum, right? You move it from one side to the other, it'll reverse and do the same thing again in the opposite direction. That's reversible. An irreversible process would be like anything that involves, let's say, burning. If I put this through a kiln and burn it, I'm going to change the molecular structure of my ceramic cup, and I'm not going to be able to get a cup back out of that process. The same thing for any type of heat. If you have an ice cube, you have heat being sucked into the ice cube. The heat is diminishing, and you can't get that heat back out of the ice cube. But the ice cube is slowly going to be melting and moving towards what's called thermodynamic equilibrium. The idea of blah, right? A sort of like lukewarm blahness where change is not really going to happen anymore. And so that became the fundamental laws of all systems, including human systems, that we're all being shaped teleologically by a future state of heat death, thermodynamic equilibrium. Because and within that process of change, there is going to be a diminishing rate of energy to be accessed by the growing numbers of people or mouths that are living within said system. And if you interpret things that way, you're logically forced to conclude that the only way to solve the problem of the eventual population crisis and the lack of available resources is to destroy or reduce the world population, kill off a big number of eaters in order to preserve the diminishing returns.
Yeah, and that's all binary thinking with binary solutions. It's always a zero-sum game in scenarios like that. It's amazing how the Western mind has been conditioned to think this way. It's ridiculous.
It is absolutely ridiculous, and it's so unnatural, because the human mind. Babies don't think this way. When you look at toddlers, they're not only they're beautiful because they're demonstrating the simplicity and the elegance of the human mind in motion, right? They learn language with no presumptions. They're in awe of everything. They want to know why the sky is blue. They want to always intuitively ask questions of causality. and they do it quite well. They're very effective at learning. If you got a household speaking 4 or 5 fluent languages, a child in that environment will very quickly pick up fluently those languages. But what happens is when you're in an artificial, unnatural world too long, you're given false ideas of what learning is. That and your ego is artificially inflamed to the point that you don't want to ask big questions because you don't want to be wrong. Or you're told, let's say, that when students today come out of a PhD program of the STEM sciences, science, technology, engineering, math. If you come out of that, you are told and indoctrinated to believe that true science never is supposed to ask why, but only what or how, mechanically. That's fine, what or how, but why is irresponsible and ignorant if you try to think that you can do that as a scientist. Children do that naturally, and healthy scientists like Da Vinci, anybody who's making real discoveries like Leibniz, like Kepler, like Huygens, like Fermat, all of those people that I just mentioned who are not part of the British empiricist school, you read their writings, the reason why they're so productive in their lives is because they're always asking why. Always. And yes, they don't ignore the details, they don't ignore the mechanics, but they don't sabotage the why in favor of just becoming devoted, formula worshipping mathematicians, the way the British school promotes, or people like the Darwinian school, which essentially is effectively a statistical mathematization of biological science, which is not it. I mean, there's no accounting in the Darwinian worldview for how human beings, how a qualitatively new species emerged from an inferior set of systems. Like how did life emerge, right? The Darwinian cannot answer, well, how did life happen with your system? It all presumes the existence of some randomized mutation function at some level that is just random at its heart, that just creates changes like rolling of the dice, and those changes give advantage for those species that get lucky, get a bigger feather, a bigger claw, that can then kill its enemies or have more sex in a fight of diminishing returns in a world that is presumed to be a closed system. And as a closed system is always reducing in the amount of food available for the competing members of whatever species, and those species that thrive are those that can kill and have more sex. That's really it is. It's a sex kill version of life that is used to then extrapolate and explain how every species ever came into being or disappeared, but they can't explain how life happened from a point where there was no material life on the earth, and they can't express how conscious life emerged where there was no conscious life. Like plants are not going to make the choices of a dog or a cat or a rabbit or a fish, so they can't explain how that leap happens, or how free will conscious life, like humans that have a conscience as well, how that emerged from realms where you only had chimpanzees and things that have a certain type of monkey intelligence, but they don't do what humans can do. But and the Darwinian system imposes this anti-creative gradualism onto a universe that exhibits no such gradualism at all. There is quantized leaps within fossil records. We don't have missing links generally. You have whole systems that come into being and that disappear in geological time. You have the same thing with human beings. We tend to exhibit these creative bursts of progress that usually accompany the moral bursts of liberty, like what came out of Benjamin Franklin's operation, not just to discover electricity and share it with new discoveries, but to create a new type of system of government whereby people were inalienably recognized as being free and not owned by the landlords on an estate. That was a very new idea of participatory government that had never been tried in any durable fashion ever before, that expressed itself materially in these incredibly measurable modes of explosive growth of population. We quadrupled. Americans quadrupled their population in the first 40 years of the young republic's existence, while at the same time increasing the quality of life, the productive powers of labor per individual, by doing things that never had been done before, where the state played a role in creating a climate of growth, but at the same time you had this enriching people could all of a sudden benefit economically from their ideas. If you had a new idea on how to make a better train engine, you could get a patent on that. You could then, if it works, you would then be able to make money that would then be able to supply you a better way of life, while at the same time benefiting your whole society by introducing a new technology. So it was a very, very elastic, creatively fluid type of system that was based upon leaping over the Malthusian limits to growth, always, at the same time as allowing for structure and central government. So government coexisted with law, along with this freedom of the individual that is enshrined in both the Constitution, that outlines the general welfare of the principle being the cause of the laws, or how the entire Constitution should be read. If something hurts the general welfare of the people, it is not lawful. It should not be done. But most people don't think on a moral level when they interpret the Constitution, including most of the Supreme Court justices, most of the time. So that's often ignored, or it's misread the way a Biden, green zombie freak show of death cultists would want to read it, by saying that, the general welfare is the welfare of the planet against humans, or the welfare of the right of the deserts to be free of humans. So we should read the Constitution in such a manner that it justifies the destruction of human life, or the destruction of dams. Like, in California, they've destroyed 52 dams last year to save nature and preserve the general rights of nature, in opposition to the farmers, the people living there who need the electricity. All of those things have been made relabeled as bad by these again, they're death cultists. That's what they are. So they misread the general welfare, or that's what Hitler did too. When you read Mein Kampf or anything else, he did everything for the greater good, or the response to a lot of the medical emergency bullshit that we've had to deal with for the past 3 years. It's all for the greater good. The climate lockdowns that they're trying to prepare us for, greater good. That's not the right kind of thing. But the real kind of greater good is, and there is a real kind of greater good. It is legit, but you have to think about it a bit. And when Xi Jinping, he just gave a speech this week, basically saying that a science of government is what China and their allies in the multipolar alliance are leading. There is such a thing as a science of government. Read Abraham Lincoln's leading economists, like Henry C. Carey, who's writing about the science of natural law. Read Alexander Hamilton. Read Benjamin Franklin. He's talking about government as being the science of human happiness, and he's actually formulating the structure around which true government that is in harmony with natural law, or in the Chinese lexicon, one might say the mandate of heaven, right? That man's law is good to the degree that it serves the mandate of heaven, the law that was already built into the moral framework of space-time of the universe and the universe's creator. So China has that idea from Confucianism. It's been developed and applied, and anytime an emperor or a ruler of China is in defiance of the mandate of heaven, the people thereby have a right to overthrow said government and institute better laws that serve the interests of Tianming. That's another way of saying the mandate of heaven. That's what Sun Yat-sen, the first president of China, who was trained by Lincoln Republicans in Hawaii in the 1870s and 80s, when he organized the American Revolution of China that created a Republic of China in 1911. His whole point was that the former Ming dynasty, or Qing dynasty, had fallen short. They became too corrupt, and they lost the mandate of heaven, giving the people the right to overthrow and institute a new form of government, around which Sun Yat-sen, a Christian Confucianist, no, these are not incompatible things, they're very compatible, called for a government for, by, and of the people, which to this very day is what Xi Jinping and the current government of China have been organizing for. I mean, Sun Yat-sen is seen as a hero of both China mainland as well as Taiwan, ironically. It's a very interesting phenomenon. And the idea isn't simply mob rule or mass democracy by saying a government by the people, for the people, of the people, but it's in harmony with the ideals that were never attained of the United States, that take both the Declaration of Independence, that say we are a nation that is based upon the unalienable rights of the individual, the life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness being there for everybody because we're human, everybody is sovereign, as well as the general welfare clause of a powerful nation state. Together, that only works if the individuals are citizens, not subjects, not creating artificial identities for themselves around recreational drug use or entertainment of video games and escapism. That doesn't work. You have to have a very disciplined, mentally, morally disciplined citizenry. As John Adams himself said, that this form of government is only equipped for, it only applies for a devoutly moral society, and is wholly unfit for
Correct.
any society.
Correct. And that is the only environment a morally upright and religious society is the only society that a republic could work in. It's the only society a Second Amendment could work in. People don't realize these things, man.
Yeah. Let me just say something here. I'm for the first time here. I never do this, but I decided to open up the comments, and I'm just following some of the live commentaries. Rob, maybe you're just new to some of this stuff. I'm not too sure, but Rob writes, Lincoln had no authority under the Constitution to do what he did to the South, which voted to leave a voluntary union. Okay, so here's the thing, Rob. The South, the Confederate South, was a British Freemasonic operation run by Southern Rite Freemasons that were loyal always to Lord Palmerston, Albert Pike being a leading figure who was a Confederate general. And who set up not only the Knights of the Golden Circle that became the first foreign domestically organized terrorist organization in America. That's Albert Pike. Yes, you can look into that. That's also what became the KKK. He organized the Southern Rite Freemasonry around a more hierarchical structure, and he was always working with people like George Saunders, people like Giuseppe Mazzini, who was the head of this international Freemasonic organized terrorist network to overthrow governments called Young Europe. Young America was what Albert Pike and George Saunders managed from the South. They also had bases of operations in British Canada. The other thing is that the Confederate Constitution, which you can read, I read it, it actually calls for the illegalization of the liberation of any slave ever, or the passing of any law that would allow for the liberation of any slave. That is enshrined in one of the core articles of the Confederate Constitution. So anybody who says that they would naturally have let slavery disappear over time hasn't read the Confederate Constitution, which actually outlaws the illegalization of any slave. That is a big deal. That is a huge deal, because if you wanted to do that, you would have basically had to. Okay, well, then you should know. He said, I've read the Southern Constitution as well. Well, then you should know that the banning and the illegalization of liberation of slavery is part of it. Also, the illegalization in Article 1, Section 8 of the Confederate Constitution is it outlaws any type of government role anytime in any economic affairs, and enshrines free trade as the organizing principle of the Confederate South forever. Free trade is, by the way, a British imperial doctrine composed in the bowels of London by Adam Smith, who himself was on the pay and employed by people like Lord Shelburne, who at the time during the American Revolution was the head of British intelligence, and was deployed to create a logical framework that would justify why no colony of the British Empire, which at the time was the only one world government that existed with penetrations all over the world, highly enmeshed with Jesuitical operations, by the way, would not be allowed to use protectionism or state intervention in any way, national banking. None of this would be allowed by law if you followed the doctrines of Adam Smith's invisible hands that somehow organized the hedonistic calculus of the marketplace, where everybody under Smith's doctrine of value is animated by purely a desire to maximize pleasure and avoid pain, which is expressed in the markets, whatever that means, ignoring the fact that Smith understood very well that the markets themselves were being managed massively by the British East India Company and the City of London, which were, just like today, the center of global financial manipulation. That's not a new thing. And the British East India Company was a globally extended operation utilizing monopolies of various forms of control. Oh, hello. No. Rob is saying, so if I want a divorce, my wife can say no and hold me under her control. That's between you and your wife, dude. I'm just talking here about natural law. If yeah, that's
I'm lost.
I don't know about that, but I'm saying here that this is the actual disobedience. If you want to own human slaves, then you lose what's called the mandate of heaven, the natural law. Natural law presumes that all people are created equal and have equal access to liberty. If you create a law or an entire nation that is based upon the illegalization of the liberty of a big chunk of your population, and by the way, the black population went from, or the black slave population of the South went from 2 million in 1840 to 4 million by 1861. They were breeding them like cattle, like
Jesus.
Animals. Yeah.
Holy crud.
Of your average slave in the deep South was literally, once you were moved down into the deep South, you had about a 5 to 6 year life expectancy then. Eating bugs, you would have been lucky to eat bugs. Like that's really what the World Economic Forum wants for all of us. So if you're going to defend the Confederate South at that time, then you're on the wrong path right now. You don't understand what the nature of the world is that's shaping your future. You don't. You have to reevaluate that, because that was organized as a one world government from London to destroy the United States, undo the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence, undo America, and recreate a global slave state. So, look, I would just say reevaluate that whole idea of your sense of what the Civil War was all about. I've written several books on this called Clash of the Two Americas. Volume 1 goes deep into this. I would say pick it up. It's like $10 on my website as a PDF. Review it. It's a different story than what you've been led to believe. Now, I mean, look, there's this whole other thing that's going on right now that has a lot to do with the fact that the only viable serious resistance that is beautiful to this depopulation death cult agenda is coming out of what has become the multipolar alliance led by Russia, China, and their allies. That is the fight. That's where it's at right now. I don't see much. There is little beacons of hope and of small resistance in America. I do think that it's interesting that some of what that the Durham report just came out, and the Durham report really, it took a long friggin' time, way too long, but it does demonstrate that the FBI, what they did illegally to try to promote this idea of Russiagate, that was always a complete fraud. And even CNN is being forced to admit that this does vindicate Donald Trump and also puts a really bad light on what the FBI has done. The FBI has been caught doing so much, not only since it was created as an internal domestic terror organization under Teddy Roosevelt in 1908. That's when the FBI was created, was to run internally controlled red commie scares, red commie scares. Get out loud there, V. What are you still there, V?
Oh. I'm here. I apologize. My office is near like some plumbing and stuff. I apologize. That's what you. I'm not in the bathroom. I promise you. There's literally pipes that go overhead, right where I have like one of those hollow drop ceilings.
Yeah.
So there, you push up the tile. It's pipes directly where that's what you're hearing. Every so often they have like the sump pump outside, and you hear that stuff just going right out. It's just
not a worry. It's okay.
Okay, sorry about that.
All right. So no, I mean what you're dealing with is a structure whereby the Donald Trump he's in an interesting place. He was given a bit of a hard time, to say the least. I just found out that this woman, this insane woman who paints trees blue, who is this writer for E! Magazine, was deployed by whatever the hell is controlling her to try to like run a lawsuit about something Trump apparently did 30 years ago that he wasn't even found guilty for. But this whole sexual abuse thing. Oh, yeah. They had to change the laws in New York a year before that she put this thing out. This whole thing was bankrolled by the founder of Billionaire, who runs LinkedIn, who's an anti-Trump advocate.
Who's an Epstein Island lister right there.
Epstein Island lister. He's the one who bankrolls her entire lawsuit. She, and the jury trial is a sham. They basically forced Trump to pay like $5 million in legal damages and emotional trauma that the woman suffered by basically him just saying that she's a liar. But she couldn't prove anything that she was saying. She also openly said that she doesn't even believe that that sex has anything necessarily to do with sexual abuse. And you could just, there's these weird videos of her describing uncomfortably how like rape is all about the violence of the mind. It's not about the reality of what's happening. And this woman's insane. But all that to say, this is what people thought was going to destroy Trump. Like a lot of the deep staters thought that was going to annihilate him. It's actually caused his polls to massively increase. And even when CNN put on a program where they gave him a chance, where they basically tried to, publicly humiliate him over this conclusion, it turned out to be hugely entertaining to watch. And he wiped the floor with the moderator. And now CNN is being sued by this deep state woman, for basically giving Trump a platform and making her look bad again. So that's just an interesting thing I find fun to watch. And the Durham report showcasing the role of the FBI and intelligence agencies undermining the United States from within is also very interesting and timely, considering what I just said about Albert Pike and internal intelligence agencies organized by the British Foreign Office, which, by the way, FBI was created at the same moment that MI5 was created, modeled on MI5. It was created in 1907. FBI was created in 1908. And when Robert Mueller, the guy who was assigned to oversee the witch hunt called Russiagate, was still FBI director in 2001 in the wake of 9/11, he brought in the director of MI5 into Washington, who then integrated MI5 operations and completely transformed FBI operations to be much more based upon insurgency, infiltration, and psyops than it was previously. And so it's always
fast forward to 2016, and then you have Christopher Steele.
And you got Christopher Steele, another MI6 operative. Yeah. You got Sir Richard Dearlove, who's again another guy who just met with Zelensky, who's still a big handler. He didn't leave MI6. Nobody leaves MI6, by the way.
Stephen Halper, the Trump admin, MI6 guy.
All exactly. The whole setup of George Papadopoulos and all of this stuff. The whole thing is a British operation. This is what's managing the whole. I mean, people can read. They can read about this. I don't think I'm preaching to the choir now, but all this to say, it's still the same British thing that was trying to undo the American Revolution back in the 1860s, which was a British operation to use proxies to create civil wars, just like you see being employed under Syria. That's, thank God it's failed. Syria is being welcomed back into the Arab League through the amazing back-channel diplomacy and over-channel diplomacy of Russia and of China. You have Taiwan being used to try to provoke separatist movements right now. The same technique that was used in the artificial proxy separatist movement that was the Confederacy in the 1860s. The same thing was being done in the Bolsheviks when the Wall Street and City of London crowd under Lord Milner organized the Bolshevik Revolution to have the Russia have a civil war that ate itself up from within. Thank God that some of the better nationalists ended up coming out of that in some form of position of influence, but otherwise it almost completely annihilated Russia, which is still something that they're trying to do, and they have been trying to do for 1,000 years. They've still been trying to undermine China from within. They tried it with the Civil War, CIA National Endowment for Democracy funded proxies within Xinjiang that ran hundreds of terrorist attacks onto the Chinese, mostly Chinese police and Chinese government officials for over 14 years. China shares a border with Afghanistan. That's what was done. China responded very differently from the United States by not bombing any country, but rather doing a very different approach that involved bringing massive economic development, high-speed rail training, trade schools to Xinjiang, which has now seen a doubling of the overall life expectancy since 50 years back, and also the quality of life, productive powers. That's the right way to do it. That's how the survivors of Lincoln, the Lincoln allies, around people like Secretary of State Seward, who also survived 20 stab wounds the same night Lincoln was killed. His Secretary of State got 20 stab wounds by an assassin around the same British-directed kill operation that was deployed to kill Lincoln. Now, he survived because there was already an assassination attempt that tried to kill him a week earlier that threw him under a carriage and caused like 80 bones of his body to be broken, and he was there with like a scaffolding of metal plates everywhere, trying to like heal his body. And that's when, and luckily the metal scaffolding caused the knife to avoid all vital organs. But the guy it's a different time. Secretary of Seward was just made of sturdy stuff back then. That's what and he went back to work after a few months of rehabilitation and organized for a massive economic development strategy with people like Charles Sumner, like Ulysses S. Grant later on. It was admittedly sabotaged, but it was sabotaged because you had many people like McKinley or like Garfield who were assassinated by British-directed terrorist organizations that were nominally anarchistic, centered in Canada, centered across little cults in the USA and Europe, that killed about 28 major heads of state between 1865 and 1914 when the Archduke Ferdinand was assassinated by one of these British-directed Black Hand Serbian terrorist cells centered in a headquarters based in London. So, I mean, even Hitler, the whole creation of Hitler as a synthetic, messianic false personality was done in London's Tavistock Clinic when Hitler was getting therapy in 1912, along with Rudolf Hess, who both together were sitting in a prison in 1922, being, prepared to go on to greater things after their beer hall putsch failed. But Hitler was a Tavistock MK Ultra type or proto MK Ultra operation. That's the whole thing. So we're being played, and people are underestimating the nature and structure of British intelligence operations, past or present. They don't understand how this thing operated in ancient Greece and ancient Rome. My wife and I did a documentary on this called the Occult Roots of Secret Societies and Intelligence Operations. People can go to CanadianPatriot.org and watch that 30-minute video going through the cults of Delphi, as well as how this thing transmogrified to undermine America from within, how this overthrew and killed the best people around Franklin Roosevelt, around John F. Kennedy, including Kennedy and his brother. That documentary is thorough. It goes through that. I would suggest, especially Rob, watch that documentary. Buy volume 1 of my book. Reevaluate some of your axioms. You got to do it. If you don't have to do it because you have free will, but I'm encouraging you to do it, please. So all that to say, there's a lot going on. People need to really just increase their standards of what they think that they're capable of, both mentally and physically in the real world. And I'll end it there. I think that's been a pretty good
you covered the gambit over there, man. It was awesome. Folks, again, Matthew Ehret, get the book. It's important that you guys get the book, understand the powers, the private interests that were behind much of the events that are taking place in the United States in the past and even in the present. This way you get a very firm framework, and Matthew's book, Symphony of Two Americas, covers that. Volume 1, Volume 2, Volume 3, and Volume 4. Very, very, very pivotal for you to get and very pivotal for you to understand. And again, folks, you can find Matt over at his websites. The links are on the description box, CanadianPatriot.org, CanadianPatriot.org, RisingTideFoundation.net, as well as the Substack. The links are all in the description box. Thank you all for listening in. We are over and out. Cheers.